The tragedy of Shaquille O'Neal is that he was too big and too tall for anyone to notice he was hurting. The world saw a 7'1", 325-pound man with the loudest laugh in every room. But that enormous size was the perfect armor. We remember the dunks that shattered backboards, the way he turned the basketball court into his own personal playground. We remember Superman, the Big Diesel, the Big Aristotle. 4 NBA championship rings, 3 finals MVPs, 15 All-Star selections, 1 regular season MVP, induction into the Hall of Fame, a business empire worth $500 million. We remember him on the basketball court, in the recording studio rapping, on Hollywood film sets, at corporate boardroom tables, behind the DJ booth at massive music festivals. No matter the room, Shaquille O'Neal was always the biggest, the loudest, the most present. But beneath that laughter was a newborn baby in Newark, New Jersey, whose biological father walked out before the child could even remember his face. Beneath the Superman cape was a husband who single-handedly destroyed his own marriage, and then sat alone in an empty mansion. Behind those 4 championship rings was a big brother who couldn't save his little sister from cancer, a teammate who never made that final phone call to Kobe Bryant before the helicopter went down. Shaquille O'Neal's success never told the whole story. How could the biggest man in basketball history carry inside him a void that 4 championship rings and $500 million could never fill? Before we look through the Superman armor to find the man who turned it into a disguise, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for Shaq. Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal was born on March 6, 1972, weighing just 7.5 pounds. The name his parents gave him means little warrior in Arabic. Yet the child called Little would become the largest man in basketball history. His father was Joseph Toney, a student at Seton Hall University, who had been recruited to play college basketball, a man with real athletic talent in his blood. But Toney fell into drugs, was arrested for possession of controlled substances and check forgery while Shaq was still a toddler, and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. When he got out, his wife and son had already moved to Germany with the military assignment of another man, and Toney made no effort to find them. He signed over parental rights to Philip Harrison, the man Lucille had married when Shaq was 2, and simply walked out of his son's life. A man looked at his child's life and chose to leave. Years later, when asked about his biological father, Shaq said, "He had problems when he was young. I don't judge, but the non-judgment of an adult does not erase the wound of a child." Before Harrison arrived, Shaq lived with his mother, Lucille, at his grandmother Odessa's house in Jersey City. 3 generations of women raising a boy who was growing at an unnatural rate. He never lacked love, but he lacked something women alone could not fully replace: the presence of a manzan, a male role model, the heavy footsteps coming home every evening. Then Philip Harrison walked in, and everything changed. Lucille was working at City Hall when Harrison, a U.S. Army sergeant, saw her and said, "My God, you're beautiful." Lucille didn't smile. She looked the man in uniform straight in the eye and replied, "If you want to date me, you have to take care of my son." Harrison not only accepted that condition, he made it the mission of his life. He married Lucille and adopted Shaq. Harrison was a drill sergeant, steel discipline, no tolerance for laziness or excuses. The family moved constantly with military assignments, from New Jersey to Germany, then Georgia, then Texas. Shaq grew at a terrifying rate, already 6'1" at age 13, and that abnormal size made him a target, bullied for being too big, too clumsy, too different from every other kid in class. But Harrison would not let his son shrink. He pushed Shaq into sports, especially basketball, with military coaching intensity. No complaining, no quitting, no excuses. He worked security jobs on the side at sporting events just so Shaq could be around competitive environments, so the giant child could see that size could be a weapon if paired with discipline. Harrison was the first to see that basketball was not just a sport but an escape route for his son, the only ticket out of cramped neighborhoods and dead-end futures. Shaq later said of him, "I don't use the word stepfather. I use the word father. He is the one who made me who I am. I live in this big house because of him. People still talk about me 5 years after I retired because of him." At Cole High School in San Antonio, Texas, Shaq finally found a place where his enormous size was not a weakness but absolute power. On the basketball court, no one could ignore him, no one could walk away from him, no one could pretend he didn't exist. He led Cole to a 68-1 record over 2 years, became a McDonald's All-American, and every dunk he threw down was a declaration, "I am here. I cannot be overlooked." Basketball was where Shaq proved he would never be abandoned again. At Louisiana State University, he immediately dominated college basketball, as if the game had been designed for his body. Two-time unanimous first-team All-American in 1991 and 1992. National Player of the Year in 1991. After his junior year, he decided to leave college for the 1992 NBA draft, and Harrison supported the decision because he knew his son was ready, and because the family finally needed the financial stability only the NBA could provide. On June 24, 1992, the Orlando Magic used the #1 pick in the NBA draft to select Shaquille O'Neal, and from that moment, professional basketball was about to change forever. He was 20 years old, 7'1", over 300 pounds. No one had ever entered the league with that combination of size, speed, and pure power. His rookie contract shattered every historical NBA record at the time. But even before spending a single basketball paycheck, Shaq was already living large entirely on endorsement money. In the 1992-93 rookie season, Shaq averaged 23.4 points and 13.9 rebounds per game, monstrous numbers for a first-year player that many players never reach in an entire career. The Rookie of the Year award arrived as if it had been engraved with his name before the season even started. But what truly made America understand that Shaq was unlike anyone who had ever played this game was not the statistics. It was the dunks that destroyed backboards. He didn't just score. He literally destroyed infrastructure, snapped rims, pulled down entire support systems, and the NBA, for the first time in history, had to redesign its entire basket support apparatus because of the existence of one man. Shaq conquered with irresistible force, with the brutal reality that every opponent on the floor knew exactly what he was going to do and still could not stop him. That style was no accident. It reflected the core wound of the abandoned child in Newark. Shaq did not need to be admired for finesse. He needed to be impossible to ignore. In the 1994-95 season, Shaq and Anthony "Penny" Hardaway formed the youngest, most promising duo the NBA had seen in years. Two young men, blazing talent, perfect complements. Shaq, the physical force, dominating inside the paint. Penny, the smoothness and creativity on the perimeter. They led the Orlando Magic to the NBA Finals for the first time in franchise history, and the whole city believed a new dynasty was beginning, that the future belonged to these two. But in the finals, Hakeem Olajuwon and the Houston Rockets were waiting, and the great Nigerian center taught the 22-year-old Shaq a brutal lesson about the gap between raw talent and true maturity. Orlando was swept in 4 straight games. Shaq scored, but not enough. His footwork was still raw. Free throw shooting remained a fatal weakness. Tactical defense was still elementary. Hakeem showed him that enormous size could be beaten by skill and intelligence, that being big alone had never been enough. The same lesson Harrison had once taught, now rewritten in the ink of public humiliation. In 1996, Shaq left Orlando to sign a 7-year, $121 million contract with the Los Angeles Lakers, and the city he left felt betrayed to the bone. Fans burned his jerseys. The press called him a traitor. Shaq justified it by saying he needed a bigger stage, an organization more serious about building a dynasty. Maybe he was right. But what he did not do was handle the relationship with Penny properly before leaving. He did not sit down and explain, did not try to preserve the friendship, did not face the complexity of saying goodbye. He simply walked away and left the empty space behind to fill itself with resentment. Years later, on the Pivot podcast, Shaq would call this a big mistake, one of the 3 biggest regrets of his life. And if you look closely, a frightening pattern was already beginning to repeat. One Shaq himself may not have recognized at the time. When things got hard, when a relationship demanded vulnerability and compromise, the giant man chose to leave rather than stay and fix it. In Los Angeles, Shaq would find what he had always been searching for: undeniable greatness, championship rings, absolute dominance that history would never forget. But he would also meet the only person in his life who was his equal, a 17-year-old kid named Kobe Bryant, with cold eyes and an ambition so fierce it was frightening. And that relationship would both create the greatest legacy and become the second deepest wound of his life, second only to the void Joseph Toney left behind. In the summer of 1996, the two arrived in Los Angeles at the same time, and that meeting would produce both the greatest dynasty and the deepest scar in both of their lives. Shaquille O'Neal, 24 years old, already a superstar, the biggest contract in the NBA, a man no room was large enough to contain. Kobe Bryant, 17 years old, just out of high school, had not played a single professional minute, yet carried a confidence bordering on arrogance that only the insane or the genius possess. Shaq asked the kid what he wanted to become. Kobe looked the 7'1" man straight in the eye and answered without a second of hesitation, "I'm going to be the best player in the world. Off the court, I'm going to be bigger than Will Smith." Shaq laughed. Whoa, whoa, whoa. But inside, he knew those cold eyes were not joking. In 1999, coach Phil Jackson arrived, bringing the triangle offense and Zen philosophy. And for the first time, someone saw how those two pieces fit together. Jackson understood Shaq was the destruction weapon inside the paint, Kobe the surgical blade that could cut through any defense. Both were needed. But both believed they were the more important one, and Jackson became the referee between two geniuses. An unsustainable role, but long enough to make history. In the 1999-2000 season, Shaq won the regular season MVP, averaging 29.7 points, 13.6 rebounds, and 3.8 assists per game. The Lakers won the title, and Shaq was Finals MVP. In 2001, the Lakers steamrolled the playoffs with a 15-1 record, the most dominant run in history, and Shaq was Finals MVP again. In 2001-02, the three-peat was complete, sweeping the New Jersey Nets, and Shaq stood atop the world with his third consecutive Finals MVP. 3 years, 3 championships, 3 Finals MVPs. During that period, Shaq was virtually unstoppable by any legal defensive scheme, to the point that opponents had to invent the hack-a-Shaq strategy, deliberately fouling him to send him to the free throw line, choosing to exploit his weakness rather than try to defend him in vain. The three-peat was when the entire league knelt before pure power, not for one night but for 3 consecutive years. Yet right in the middle of that greatness, the crack between Shaq and Kobe grew deeper every day. It was never personal hatred, but 2 completely different definitions of greatness colliding daily in the same locker room. Kobe was obsessed with perfection, waking up to work out at 4 a.m., treating basketball like life or death. Shaq believed in natural talent, treating basketball like a playground where joy was the fuel, maintaining discipline on the court but not in the summer weight room, not in controlling his weight, not in improving his free throws. Kobe was furious that Shaq returned each season heavier and slower. Shaq was furious that Kobe wouldn't pass the ball and wanted the spotlight. The locker room split into factions, Team Kobe and Team Shaq, and every player had to choose a side. In practice, the two actually fought, and Brian Shaw had to jump in to break it up. A media war erupted, every interview a bomb thrown at the other side. In the 2003-04 season, the Lakers signed Karl Malone and Gary Payton in one last desperate attempt, but they failed miserably against the Detroit Pistons in the finals, and that was the final straw. In the summer of 2004, the Lakers chose Kobe, trading Shaq to the Miami Heat for Lamar Odom, Caron Butler, Brian Grant, and a future pick. The man who had delivered 3 championships was packed up and shipped out like a piece of cargo. And here, if you listen closely, there is an echo from childhood. The boy abandoned by his biological father was now being discarded by the very organization with which he had built a dynasty. Shaq was furious. He left a mocking voicemail for Kobe that leaked in 2011. He recorded diss tracks, his ego shattered into painful pieces disguised as aggression. But beneath all the noise was a truth both men were too proud to see. Both Shaq and Kobe were sons carrying wounds from their fathers. Kobe with his complicated relationship with Joe Bryant. Shaq with the void Tony had left. Both sought validation on the same stage but did not know how to share the spotlight, because sharing meant accepting they were not enough on their own, and that was something the wounded children inside them could not admit. Shaq later said, "The respect was always there. We just didn't see eye to eye. But it wasn't conflict. It just looked like conflict. Yet in 2004, neither was mature enough to see it. They needed to lose each other before they could understand each other's value." In Miami, Shaq found what Los Angeles never gave him, a teammate willing to share the stage. Young Dwayne Wade, blazing talent but different from Kobe in the decisive way. Wade willingly let Shaq be the centerpiece and then exploded when needed. No ego wars, no locker room factions. In 2006, a championship, the fourth ring. Wade won Finals MVP, but Shaq was still the spiritual anchor. That title proved he could succeed with the right teammate. The problem in LA was never just Shaq or just Kobe, but two men too big for a room that was never built to hold both. After Miami, the final years drifted by like late afternoon shadows. Phoenix, Cleveland, Boston. 3 teams in 3 years, declining athleticism, constant injuries, each season slower, heavier, farther from the version that once made the entire NBA kneel. In June 2011, at age 39, after 19 seasons, Shaquille O'Neal retired. For the first time in his life, there was no game next week, no whistle, no 20,000 people screaming his name every night. For the first time, the giant man faced silence, and in that silence, real life began. The first layer stripped away was marriage. Shaq met Shawnee Nelson in the late 1990s when he was at the absolute peak with the Lakers, when the whole world was at his feet and nothing seemed capable of collapsing. They married on December 26, 2002, in a private ceremony at a Beverly Hills hotel, the same year the three-peat had just closed. 4 children were born in succession: Sharif, Amira, Shakir, Miara. Shaq also adopted Miles, Shawnee's son from a previous relationship, treating boy as his own, exactly what Philip Harrison had once done for him. On the surface, it was the perfect superstar family. A massive mansion, beautiful children, a glamorous wife beside the most powerful man in basketball. Inside, the cracks had started long before anyone saw them. Shaq admitted in his 2011 memoir, Shaq Uncut, without excuse or evasion. He cheated multiple times throughout the marriage. His words verbatim, "I was a guy with too many options. Choosing to be with a few of those women. That was my fault." Shawnee discovered the truth in the most brutal way. The two accidentally switched BlackBerry phones, and Shawnee read everything, every text, every conversation, every piece of evidence without needing to search. Her reaction was not quiet tears but primal rage. She slashed Shaq's tires, smashed the windows, carved messages into the hood with a knife. And here the core paradox of Shaquille O'Neal became clearer than ever. The biggest, strongest, richest, most famous man, yet not mature enough to cherish what he already had. Size did not teach him how to love. Fame did not teach him loyalty. Money did not teach him how to stay, when staying was the hardest thing. Harrison taught him discipline. But Shaq only kept that discipline on the basketball court. Off the court, he lived as if the rules did not apply to Superman. They separated in 2007. Temporarily reconciled, Shawnee filed for divorce in 2009. It was finalized in 2011. On the Pivot podcast years later, Shaq sat down and spoke with the voice of a man who had finally seen himself clearly. "I had the perfect situation. A wife who was drop-dead gorgeous. Kept having kids and still drop-dead gorgeous. I had it all, and I messed it all up. I'm not making excuses. She was great. It was all me." After Shawnee and the kids moved out of the mansion, Shaq described the loneliness in the empty giant house. The biggest man in every room, now standing alone in the biggest room, realizing for the first time that the size of the room only made the emptiness more obvious. In 2024, Shawnee published her memoir, Undefeated, and admitted something even more painful than the betrayal. She had never truly loved Shaq, but loved the idea of being married to him, loved the life that name provided. When asked, Shaq responded with a maturity he never had at 30, "I get it. I wouldn't have loved myself either if I were in her position." Another layer of the wound. The child abandoned by his biological father now knew that even the wife he loved had never truly loved him back. Yet both still maintain a healthy co-parenting relationship to this day. Proof that maturity, even when it arrives late, still arrives. The second layer of armor was stripped away in September 2013 when Philip Harrison, the only father Shaq ever acknowledged, the sergeant who stepped into his life unasked and never walked away, died after a long battle with illness. Shaq lost a father for the second time, but this time it was completely different. He was a 41-year-old man who fully understood that those heavy footsteps had stopped forever, that no one on earth, no teammate, no coach, no business partner, could replace the man who looked at a child who was not his blood and decided to love him unconditionally. 3 years later, in 2016, at the advice of his mother Lucille, Shaq agreed to meet his biological father, Joseph Tony. He asked an uncle who was a police officer to locate Tony, and the truth returned with a weight no one was prepared for. Tony lived only 40 blocks away, right next door to the restaurant where Shaq regularly ate. The chef there, Tony's closest friend, always cried whenever he saw Shaq walk in, because for years he had hoped the father and son would sit down and eat together in that very room. Shaq met Tony and said, "I hold no grudges. My life went the way it was supposed to go." He forgave not because Tony deserved it, but because he himself needed to be freed from the void he had carried for 44 years. The third layer was stripped in 2018, when Superman had to face something no amount of power on a basketball court could change. Sheriff O'Neal, 18 years old, the oldest son, preparing for his first college season at UCLA, was found to have a congenital coronary artery abnormality during a routine physical. Mother Shawnee said it bluntly. If it had not been discovered, Sharif could have died. Open heart surgery. The 18-year-old boy was terrified, tears falling before he entered the operating room. And Shaq, the man who once shattered backboards, who once made the entire NBA kneel, stood by his son's bed unable to do anything except be there. He told Sharif, "If you get through this, you'll be the toughest guy on the planet." Then when he saw his son was still scared, he told a gentle story. "You're going to meet a girl named Anesthesia. She's going to kiss you. And then you'll wake up and everything will be fine." Superman could not save his son from a congenital heart defect. Money and fame were meaningless against biology. But Shaq did what Harrison had once done for him and Tony never did. He stayed, he did not leave, he was present. Sharif survived, had to relearn how to walk, but eventually returned to the basketball court, and Harrison's lesson once again proved it lived on through the next generation. Then the fourth layer was stripped, and this time there was no miracle. In October 2019, Aisha Harrison Jex, Shaq's younger sister, the biological daughter of Philip Harrison and Lucille, died at age 40 after a 3-year battle with cancer. She had earned bachelor's and master's degrees from Florida A&M University, had a young son named Bryce, and was buried in a military cemetery right beside her father, Philip Harrison, the two of them together again at last. That night, for the first time in years, Shaq's chair on the TNT set was empty. Ernie Johnson looked into the camera and said in a broken voice, Shaq said his world revolved around his big brother and his 2 little sisters. He just lost one of them this morning. Then, I'm trying to describe how Shaq is reacting, and he is just devastated. Charles Barkley, who always traded comic barbs with Shaq on air, suddenly became uncharacteristically gentle. "I want to send a special hug to Mom Lucille. She came and stayed with my mother in her final days." Shaq replied from Florida, "If I had big brothers, it would be you 3. Superman could not save his sister from cancer. The cape had no magic outside the basketball court. And only 3 months later, the final layer of armor would be torn away. On January 26, 2020, a helicopter crashed into a fog-covered hillside in Calabasas, California. Kobe Bryant, his 13-year-old daughter Gianna, and 7 others were killed. Shaq received the news on social media, did not want to believe it, tried to find ways to deny it, but the phone began ringing non-stop from friends and colleagues, and the truth arrived undeniable. On January 28, TNT broadcast Remembering Kobe from a darkened Staples Center, and this was the moment the opening of this script had foreshadowed. Shaq sat in the analyst chair alongside Ernie Johnson, Charles Barkley, Kenny Smith, Dwayne Wade, Reggie Miller, and Jerry West, in the dim light of the arena where he and Kobe had once made history, and tears ran down the face of a man America had never seen cry. "I haven't felt a pain this sharp in a very long time," he said, voice breaking. "I lost a little brother." Then he said the thing that made everything heavier still. "We're never going to be able to joke with each other at the Hall of Fame induction. Never going to say, 'I got 5, you got 4. Never going to say if we stayed together we would have won 10. The 7'1", 325-pound man who always laughed, always joked, always dominated every room, suddenly became impossibly small in that broadcast chair. The laughter disappeared. The Superman mask fell to the floor, and beneath it was only a man crying for the brother he had wasted 15 years being angry at instead of calling to say, "I love you." On his own podcast a few days later, Shaq declared, "I'm going to erase every conflict. I don't want to do that anymore, because you never know. He called everyone he had ever fallen out with and said exactly 3 words. I love you. Kobe's death was not only a loss, it was a mirror that forced Shaq to look at himself, at every call he never made, every apology he never spoke, every moment when ego was bigger than love. In roughly 7 years, Shaquille O'Neal lost his stepfather, nearly lost his son, lost his sister, lost Kobe. Each loss stripped away another layer of the Superman armor, and beneath the final layer remained only a man carrying the same void the child in Newark had carried from the day his biological father walked out and never returned. To understand Shaquille O'Neal at age 54, you have to look at the loop he spent a lifetime trying to break, but never fully escaped. Joseph Tony left when Shaq was still an infant. Philip Harrison stepped in and taught him everything. Shaq swore he would never be like Tony, that he would always be present for his children, that he would always be there. But life does not allow anyone to keep a vow by pure will alone. He did not leave in the literal sense. He did not disappear from his children's lives the way Tony did, but the affairs destroyed the family from within. The schedule pulled him thousands of miles away from his kids every week, and the arrogance made him believe money could replace presence. He did not leave, yet he was still absent, a more subtle form of abandonment, harder to recognize, but still leaving its mark. The way he raised his 6 children reveals the internal war between the Tony wound and the Harrison lesson. Shaq is worth $500 million, yet requires his sons to move out at 18 while his daughters can stay as long as they like. If any of the children want startup capital from their father, they must present a resume, a business plan, and specific numbers. No exceptions, no special treatment for carrying the O'Neal name. He says, I believe in nepotism, but only when it's done the right way. That is pure Harrison, discipline, self-reliance, nothing free. But it also reflects the fear inherited from Tony. Shaq is terrified his children will cling to their father's money, terrified of creating people who can never stand on their own feet. 6 children, each a different answer to the question, what is it like to be the child of a living legend? Tahira, the oldest daughter with Arnetta Yardborg, chose the quietest life, working at PepsiCo, staying far from the spotlight, as if she saw the price of fame and decided not to pay it. Miles, Shawnee's son from a previous relationship, was adopted by Shaq and treated as his own. The Harrison loop repeating in its most beautiful form. The man once saved by a stepfather, now doing the same for a child who is not his blood. Sharif survived open heart surgery and continued pursuing professional basketball. Shaqir plays basketball at Sacramento State, and Shaq took on the volunteer general manager role for his son's team, not interfering but supporting from behind, the same way Harrison once worked security at arenas just so his son could stay close to the game. Amira and Miara both play basketball, following in their father's footsteps. The O'Neal family is not a perfect picture. It is complicated, marked by divorce and distance, but it has something the Tony family never had, a continuous effort to repair, even when the repair is incomplete. And the story with his biological father ended like no movie. Joseph Tony died in 2023. There is no photo of father and son in matching jerseys, no tearful reunion in front of cameras. Only a belated meal in 2016 at Vonda's Kitchen in Newark, a conversation between 2 strangers who shared the same blood, and 1 sentence, I hold no grudges. My life went the way it was supposed to go. The void Tony left was never filled, it was only accepted. And perhaps that is more honest than any neat ending, because real life contains voids that never close, and the courage lies in continuing to live even while the void remains. In April 2022, Shaq sat on the Pivot podcast with Ryan Clark, Channing Crowder, and Fred Taylor and said something few athletes of his stature ever dare to say. Just because what you do makes you look perfect doesn't mean you are perfect. Then he listed his 3 biggest regrets, one by one, without excuse. First, Penny Hardaway, the first relationship destroyed by walking away. Shaq left Orlando without properly handling the friendship, without sitting down to explain, simply vanishing. The pattern of leaving rather than facing that he would repeat many times before recognizing it existed. At 54, he knows that relationship could have been saved if he had been less arrogant. Second, Kobe Bryant. We made history together. No matter what people think about us having issues, we were the most dominant, most unique center guard combination ever created, never to be repeated. The regret is not about the on-court conflict. It is about the calls never made, the moments he could have said, "I appreciate you," but ego stood in the way. Aisha died in October 2019, Kobe in January 2020, two people in 3 months, and that moment forced him to see the truth. Time waits for no one. Every delayed call is a call that may never be made. I work too much. I have to start calling and saying, "I love you," instead of always putting it off. In 2004, he left a mocking voicemail for Kobe. In 2020, he wished he had left a message saying, "I love you." The distance between those two messages is 16 years, and inside those 16 years is all the maturity he had to pay for with loss. Third, the marriage. I was arrogant, I was stupid. Sometimes when you do too many things, you don't want to put effort into anything. Harrison taught him discipline, but Shaq only carried that discipline onto the basketball court. Not into the marriage, not into the midnight decisions, when fame opened too many doors that a mature man should have known to close. This admission, public, without excuse, without blame, is what sets Shaq apart. He does not say, "Circumstances pushed me." He says, "I messed it up." And it is precisely that ruthless honesty with himself that creates the strongest emotional layer. Not pity for a victim, but compassion for a man courageous enough to look in the mirror and tell the whole world exactly what he sees. Amid all the loss and regret, one person is still there. Shaquille O'Neal, his mother, the woman who held the family together when Tony left, when Harrison died, when Aisha died. Shaq paid for his mother to go to college. She earned a bachelor's in business administration and then a master's in organizational management. The son repaying the mother with education, the most beautiful loop in this story full of scars. Lucille is still alive, and that is an important difference. Shaq has lost much, but not everything. He still has an anchor, still has the woman who knew him before the whole world knew his name. And the body that once shattered backboards now demands the care Superman never thought he would need. In 2011, right after retiring, Shaq was diagnosed with sleep apnea at Harvard Medical School. The doctor said bluntly, "You could die." Shaq ignored it because he thought he was superhuman. During the pandemic, he gained serious weight and the symptoms worsened. In 2026, at age 54, he publicly began using Zepbound, completely overhauled his diet from 4 or 5 McDonald's meals a day to protein, fish, chicken, and regular walking. He said, "I'm sharing the experience because sleep apnea is a serious condition that often gets overlooked. I want to help people if I can. Superman has to take medication so he can sleep without stopping breathing, but that is not a tragedy. It is the dignity of a man choosing to fight for his health instead of pretending to be invincible, choosing to use his platform to raise awareness instead of hiding weakness. The man at 54 no longer shatters rims or dominates the paint, but he is doing what Harrison taught from the very first day, being present, taking care, not walking away. And when history looks back at Shaquille O'Neal, what will they remember? At 54, Shaquille O'Neal is still the biggest man in every room he enters. Only the rooms have changed. No longer NBA locker rooms or tunnels leading to the court, but television studios where he jokes with Ernie Johnson, Charles Barkley, and Kenny Smith on Inside the NBA every night. Music festival stages where DJ Diesel makes thousands of people dance. Boardrooms of a business empire worth roughly $500 million with the Big Chicken restaurant chain. Papa John's equity. Hundreds of franchise locations and tech investments. He earns about $60 million a year after retirement, more than double his peak playing salary. Shaq never stops, never leaves any empty space in the schedule, never allows silence to last more than a few hours. And the question this script does not answer for him is, because he truly loves all of it, or because he is still afraid of the silence, still afraid that if he stops long enough, the void from Newark will catch up. On the TNT set, the Superman mask works most perfectly. Shaq jokes, laughs, roast Barkley about his weight, plays silly games that make millions of viewers adore him. But the very men sitting beside him in those chairs were there the night Aisha died, cried with him when Kobe was gone, looked straight into the camera and told all of America that he is just devastated, when Shaq could not say it himself. They are a second family. Proof that Shaq, despite losing much, despite destroying much, still has the capacity to create and sustain genuine relationships when he allows himself to be vulnerable. The next generation of O'Neals is writing its own stories, each child in his or her own way, stepping out from under the giant shadow of their father, the way Shaq once stepped out from under the absent shadow of Tony. But when basketball history looks back at Shaquille O'Neal, what will they remember? If only the numbers, then these: 7th all-time in total points scored, 5th in field goals made, 13th in rebounds, 7th in blocks, 58.2% field goal percentage, ranking 3rd in history, 4 championships, 3 finals MVPs, 1 regular season MVP, 15 All-Star selections, Hall of Fame in 2016, named to both the top 50 and top 75 greatest players of all time. But the numbers do not tell the most important thing. Shaquille O'Neal did not just play basketball well, he changed the way basketball is played. The NBA had to redesign its entire basket support system because of him. Opponents had to invent the hack-a-Shaq strategy because no legal defensive scheme worked. The rules themselves had to change because of the existence of one single man. Basketball history is divided into before Shaq and after Shaq, not because he was perfect. His 52.7% career free throw percentage, the worst among legends, is proof he was not, but because he forced the game to adjust itself around his presence, the same way he forces every room to adjust when he walks in. Shaq reminded the planet that basketball can be both dominant and fun at the same time. In an era when the NBA has grown increasingly serious, increasingly tactical, increasingly obsessed with efficiency and data, Shaq gave basketball laughter, gave it silliness, gave it rap battles and comedy movies and crazy commercials and dunk contests and moments when the boundary between sport and entertainment completely disappeared. He did not just win games. He turned basketball into something children wanted to watch, not for the strategy, but for pure joy. Shaquille O'Neal is not a perfect legend. He destroyed a marriage with arrogance. He wasted 15 years being angry at Kobe instead of calling to say, "I love you." He let ego outweigh love in too many critical moments. He is also not a cautionary tale of wasted talent. He overcame an abandoned childhood, built an empire, raised 6 children, and late but sincerely learned to admit his mistakes in front of the whole world without blaming anyone but himself. He is both great and flawed, dominant and fragile, the loudest laugh and the deepest pain in the same person. And it is precisely that complexity that makes him truly human. Philip Harrison was not the biggest man in the room. He did not have 4 championship rings, did not have $500 million, did not have millions of people who knew his name. He was an army sergeant with a modest salary who worked security on the side so his son could stay close to the basketball court. But he was the one WHO always stayed. He stepped into the life of a child who was not his blood when no one asked him to, and he never walked away. The lesson Harrison left was not become big, it was be present. And Shaq needed decades, 4 championships, 1 divorce, the death of his stepfather, the death of his sister, the death of Kobe, and thousands of lonely nights in houses too large for one person before he began to truly understand that lesson. At 54, when he takes the volunteer general manager role for his son's basketball team, when he calls people he once fell out with just to say the 3 words, "I love you," when he publicly shares about sleep apnea to help strangers instead of hiding weakness. That is Harrison living. Through him, that is the sergeant's lesson finally taking root after decades of Shaq, trying to replace it with size, with fame, with laughter louder than every pain. The laughter Shaq created, on the basketball court, on television, in life, has become part of the game, living in every child who tries to dunk and break a rim. In every moment, a fan laughs at a highlight. In every center who believes he can be both a dominant force and the source of joy for the whole team. But the deepest legacy of Shaquille O'Neal does not lie on the basketball court. It lies in the 6 children growing up, knowing that their father, though imperfect, though he made mistakes, though he destroyed many beautiful things, tried, was there, did not leave. Superman is not perfect. But the little boy in Newark, the child abandoned by his biological father, the child rescued by an army sergeant, the child who was once too big to fit anywhere except a basketball court, became the man who never stopped trying to be present, even though it took him half a lifetime to understand that presence is the greatest thing a father can do. And perhaps in the end, that is the 5th championship ring he searched for his entire life, not made of gold and diamonds, but of quiet, patient presence, imperfect yet never abandoning. When you look back at the journey of Shaquille O'Neal, what comes to you first? The dunk that shattered the rim, the laughter that echoed across America, or the tears on television the night Kobe was gone? Share your memories in the comments below and help us honor the man who taught the world that you can be both the biggest and the most vulnerable in the same room. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next stories about the legends the world only knows half of. Thank you for staying until the very last minute. See you in the next video.